Breaking. New York socialite spotted in late-night airport reunion with first love, sparking rumors of a rekindled romance. In the accompanying GIF, a woman in a white dress is seen laughing as she throws herself into the arms of a man in a black suit amidst a downpour at the airport. The man holds an umbrella, tilting it to shield her head, a picture of careful devotion. The image went viral, with countless people on social media fawning over the couple. Inside the French restaurant, Daniel repeatedly zoomed in and out on the news photo, but he could never quite make out the expression on the woman's face. His focus was broken by a soft voice at his side. "Sir, the restaurant is about to close. Do you need to wait any longer?" A clap of thunder rattled the windows as the rain intensified. Daniel turned to look outside, his own expressionless face reflected in the glass. It was his birthday, but the guest of honor felt no joy at all. For this birthday, he had booked her favorite restaurant 2 weeks in advance and spent half the day with the chef finalizing a menu of all her favorite dishes. He had woken up at 5 in the morning to get ready and arrived at the restaurant carrying her favorite green tea cake. Even though it was his birthday, he had planned everything around her preferences. She hadn't shown up, but he knew she was busy and didn't dare to bother her. So he just waited. He waited as dusk fell and the city lights began to glow. He waited as the server repeatedly asked when to begin service. He waited as the exquisite dishes grew cold in the kitchen. He waited as the warmth in his own heart slowly chilled. The person he was waiting for never came. He looked down at the delicate woman in the photo, a bitter, self-mocking smile touching his lips. In 5 years of marriage, he couldn't count the number of times he had waited for her. Every time began with hopeful anticipation and ended in disappointment. The moment that other man appeared, she would drop everything for him, including the husband who had been by her side for 5 years. Suddenly, Daniel felt exhausted. He didn't want to wait anymore. He didn't want to continue this one-sided marriage. He looked up at the server with a faint smile. "That's all right. I'm done waiting. None of the food has been touched. Could I possibly trade it for an umbrella?" "Thank you." Out in the pouring rain, he held the umbrella and hailed a cab. Leaning against the window as the city blurred past in the mist and rain, his mind drifted. He had come from nothing, an orphan with no prospects. If it weren't for the Miller family scholarship, he never would have made it through college. After pulling himself up by his bootstraps, he never forgot his debt to the Millers. Then, at a charity gala, he met Sarah Miller. She was seated at a prominent table, the light casting shadows across her face, a cool glint in her sharp eyes. She radiated an aloof, unapproachable energy. With just one look from across the room, he felt as if he were being pulled into a whirlpool, his heart starting to race. After seeing the nameplate at her table, he gathered his courage and approached to thank her. She glanced up at him, took a delicate sip of her champagne, and casually asked what he wanted. He took a deep breath and explained how the Miller family support had changed his life, expressing his profound gratitude. When she heard he wanted to repay them, her eyes, hazy from the wine, scanned him up and down before she let out a soft, amused laugh. "Repay me? I have all the money and power I need. What I don't have is a presentable man on my arm. Are you offering yourself?" In that moment, he was stunned, completely at a loss for words. But through the shock, he heard his own heart pounding in his ears, and, as if possessed, he heard himself say yes. There was no proposal, no rings, no wedding, and no announcement. They just went and got a marriage license. Perhaps because he had come to her so easily, she never cared much for him after they were married. For 5 years, he tried to find a way into her heart, but the door remained firmly locked. He used to think he just wasn't good enough, but he eventually discovered the truth. Her heart was already occupied by someone else. A man named Ethan Vance, her first love. They had been young and in love, but it had ended abruptly when Ethan moved abroad. Sarah, however, had never gotten over him. Daniel slowly began to realize he was nothing more than a rebound, a tool for her to mend her broken heart. The day she had asked him to marry her was the very day Ethan had announced his own marriage overseas. The house they lived in was a villa she and Ethan had once considered buying together. The restaurant where they celebrated their anniversary was the same place she had first confessed her feelings to Ethan. Too many of these coincidences had slowly eroded his love for her. A notification chimed, pulling him from his reverie. He unlocked his phone to see a new iMessage from a contact with a plain black icon. Something came up. "I'll celebrate with you next year." Daniel let out a soft, hollow laugh. "Next year? Sarah, there is no next year for us. Our marriage ends today. You were the one who proposed marriage. Now, I'll be the one to propose divorce. The car pulled up smoothly to the villa. A man in a black overcoat held an umbrella with one hand, carefully guiding the woman in his other arm up the steps. The front door swung open and a housekeeper came to greet them, taking the large umbrella from his hand. Sarah paused, a frown creasing her brow when she didn't see the familiar figure she expected. She kept the coat she'd taken off, draping it over her own arm instead of handing it over. "Where's Daniel?" "He hasn't returned yet, ma'am." Sarah stopped in her tracks. Only then did she remember she was supposed to be celebrating Daniel's birthday. But she got a call from Ethan halfway there and had immediately turned around to go to the airport. She glanced out the window. The sky was an inky black, and a howling wind drove sheets of rain against the house. A damp chill seeped in through a window that wasn't fully closed. A flicker of guilt stirred within her. Would Daniel be angry? The thought barely formed before she dismissed it. Daniel getting angry was probably the most unlikely thing in the world. He was always so reasonable, so soft-spoken, never one to argue. Over the years, she had often drunkenly called out Ethan's name in his presence, and he would always pretend not to hear, his expression unchanged as he prepared a remedy for her hangover. Why would he get angry over something so trivial? Seeing a flicker of concern on her face, the housekeeper asked hesitantly, "Ma'am, should I try calling him?" Sarah waved it off. "No, he'll be back. When he gets here, tell him to come to my study." Then, she turned to Ethan and said softly, "It's getting late. You can sleep in his room for tonight." Ethan looked at her, feigning hesitation. "I don't know, Sarah. It is Daniel's room, after all." She just shook her head. "He won't mind." Elsewhere, Daniel stepped out of the taxi and opened the umbrella he'd been given. Rain cascaded off the edges of the umbrella, forming a curtain that separated him from the world. It did little, however, to block the biting wind. He pulled his coat tighter and decided to find a place to stay for the night. After viewing a few places, he settled on a condo overlooking the East River, signing a 6-month lease on the spot. He had just closed the door behind him when his phone rang. He frowned when he saw the caller's name, but he swiped to answer anyway. "Hello. Daniel, hi, it's Ethan Vance. I heard you and Sarah had a fight because of me and that you haven't gone home. I'm so sorry, and I'm worried. I feel like I should explain things between us. We dated, yes, but that's all in the past. We're just friends now. I truly want you two to be happy, so please don't let me come between you. If you could, please just give her a call back. I hate to see her so worried." Daniel found it laughable. The Millers were one of the most powerful families in the city. If Sarah were truly worried, she would have called or sent someone to find him hours ago. Yet the first call he received after leaving was from Ethan. He had no patience for the man's faux innocent act and hung up. Staring at the disconnected call, Ethan gritted his teeth and dialed again. Daniel hung up on him each time he called. Finally, on the last attempt, Daniel answered. The line was silent for a long moment. Then, a low chuckle came from the other end. "I guess you're not as reasonable and understanding as Sarah always says you are. I thought you had a higher tolerance for this sort of thing. I mean, making a fuss after 5 years of marriage, and this is all you can do," Ethan said smugly, examining his nails. "Daniel, running away from home won't work. If you're willing to step aside gracefully, I'll make sure Sarah gives you a generous settlement." Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet. "All right." Ethan, perhaps not expecting him to agree so easily, was taken aback. "What?" Daniel's calm voice came through the phone. "You said you'd get me a better settlement, didn't you, Mr. Vance? If that's the case, let's meet at a coffee shop tomorrow morning." The next day, Ethan was waiting at the coffee shop long before the agreed-upon time. He stirred his coffee endlessly as the tables around him filled and emptied several times over. Daniel finally sauntered in. He glared at the newcomer, his face a mask of annoyance. "We said 9. Are you trying to waste my time, to play games with me?" Daniel sat down across from him. "Yes, Mr. Vance. I'm playing games with you." "You." Ethan raised a hand to slap him, but Daniel caught his wrist and used his momentum to shove him back. Ethan stumbled back into the booth, his eyes blazing with fury. He had never imagined the man before him would be so difficult to intimidate. Daniel met his gaze calmly. "You're too impatient, Mr. Vance. You'll never last as Sarah Miller's husband if you're this easily flustered." Ethan finally composed himself and studied Daniel properly. Most men, when confronted with their wife's first love, reacted the same way. They'd get red-faced, yell, and spew the ugliest, most vulgar insults. Others might appear calm on the surface, but their words would be laced with venom. Yet he had never seen a man react like this. So calm. Daniel's eyes were placid as he leisurely sipped his coffee, as if he were just there to relax. The last of Ethan's anger finally subsided. "You didn't ask me here just to have coffee, did you?" Daniel set down his cup and pulled a folder from the bag beside him, placing it on the table. The words divorce agreement leaped out at Ethan. His eyes shot wide as he stared at Daniel. "You," Daniel spoke quietly. "You wanted me to divorce Sarah, didn't you?" "I agree. You just have to do two things for me. Once the mandatory waiting period is over and the divorce is finalized, I will disappear from your lives forever." A thrill of triumph shot through Ethan. He felt closer than ever to becoming Sarah's husband. He took several deep breaths to keep the smile from his face. "What do you need?" Daniel said calmly. "First, I still have some personal belongings at the house. I need you to pack them up and mail them to me. I'll send you the address. Second, I've already signed these divorce papers. You need to find a way to get her to sign them without her realizing what they are." Ethan was confused. "Why don't you just give them to her yourself?" Daniel's gaze drifted into the distance as he remembered the day they got their license. Sarah had stood on the steps of City Hall, asking him again and again if he was sure he wanted to marry her, if it wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. At the time, he'd been so overwhelmed with happiness that all he could think about was making it official. He hadn't paid her words any mind. It wasn't until later, after he learned about her history with Ethan, that the thought of divorce had crossed his mind. But then he'd heard about the unofficial Miller family rule. There are no divorces, only widows. So the idea of divorce was shelved. Perhaps he had been holding on to a sliver of hope before, but now he was determined to end it, even if it meant enlisting the help of her first love. He wasn't sure when Ethan left. Daniel looked at his now empty bag, finished the last of his coffee, and disappeared into the city crowd. It was the third day Daniel hadn't come home. Sarah took a bite of sandwich that tasted wrong and a sip of coffee that was too milky and frowned. She slammed her mug down, tossed the sandwich back onto the plate, and looked at the housekeeper. "Did we get new chef? Why does this taste so awful?" The housekeeper looked uncomfortable, hesitating before she explained. "The chef is the same, ma'am. It's just, Mr. Hayes always prepared your meals himself. We don't know his specific recipes." It was as if a dam had broken. The housekeeper went on to list all the things Daniel had done for her over the past 5 years. It wasn't just her meals. He managed every aspect of her life, from her wardrobe to her schedule. Even when he traveled for work, he would prepare everything in advance and call multiple times a day to give his staff instructions. Sarah was completely stunned. She had no idea he did all of this. He had never said a single word. Staring at the cold breakfast on the table, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. On the 5th day of Daniel's absence, Sarah finally realized he had left her. She picked up her phone and, for the first time, initiated a call to him. From the sprawling terrace, she watched the sun dip below the horizon, pulling a blanket of darkness over the sky. Her heart sank with it, and a seed of impatience began to sprout. He didn't answer, not once. Sarah took a deep breath, deciding to try calling his family. But then she remembered. Daniel was an orphan. His only grandmother had passed away years ago. She scrolled through her contacts again, only to realize she didn't know the name of a single one of his friends. She pushed open the door to Daniel's room, hoping to find some clue as to where he might be. The moment the door swung open, she froze. She rarely entered his room, but she remembered how it was decorated. He was a man of simple tastes, so the room had been Spartan, containing only the essential furniture. Now, it was overflowing with designer bags, expensive jewelry, and brightly colored formal wear. It was completely unrecognizable. She was about to ask the housekeeper who had done this when Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, holding a massive bouquet of roses. "Sarah, the roses on the rooftop terrace are stunning today. You have to see them." His words died in his throat when he saw the dark expression on her face. What's wrong? "Ethan, what happened to all of Daniel's things that were in this room?" Ethan seemed surprised for a second before quickly recovering. "Oh, all that stuff looks so dated. I had the staff get rid of it." "Sarah, are you angry with me?" This is your and Daniel's home. After all, I'm just a guest. Maybe I should just leave." His voice cracked at the end, and his eyes began to redden. Hearing his soft sobs, Sarah felt an unfamiliar wave of irritation. Daniel never cried. Even that time she'd spent 3 months overseas helping Ethan divorce his volatile ex-wife. Daniel had only ever called to tell her to be safe. Perhaps sensing her lack of immediate comfort, Ethan peeked up at her, only to find her staring blankly into the transformed room. He bit his lip, a bitter feeling rising in his chest. He was back, he was right here in front of her, and he wasn't leaving. Why was she still thinking about Daniel? His expression crumpled into one of pure misery, and he began to cry softly. It's all my fault. I never should have come back. I shouldn't be staying in his room. I'll just go. With that, he dropped the flowers and ran out of the room. Ethan! Sarah snapped out of her trance and hurried after him. Let me go. Just let me leave. Ethan cried, tears streaming down his face, his eyes filled with anguish. If it weren't for me, if I hadn't come back and caused all this trouble, he wouldn't have left in a huff. The more he struggled, the tighter she held on. This has nothing to do with you. He's the one being immature. And who made him that way? Didn't you indulge his every whim? Ethan gave a bitter smile. Do you have any idea how many sleepless nights I spent thinking about you? I'd ask our mutual friends what you were up to, and the answer was always the same. You were with him. His voice broke, and he began to cry again. Sarah could no longer hold back the words. Why do you think I married him? Others might not know the reason, but you certainly do, don't you? Ethan looked at her, his eyes wide and tear-filled. It was really because of me. Sarah didn't answer, but her silence was all the confirmation he needed. Ethan finally stopped crying. That evening, Sarah arranged a private candlelight dinner for him. Sarah rarely drank much, but tonight, she kept refilling her glass until her eyes were flushed and hazy. Seeing his opportunity, Ethan took out the divorce agreement Daniel had given him. Sarah, about that condo you bought from me. There's a supplementary agreement you need to sign. Sarah took the papers. She was normally meticulous, but as she started to open the folder, Ethan placed his hand over hers and flipped directly to the final page. He then pressed a hand to his forehead. Sarah, I'm feeling a little dizzy. Can we just sign this quickly so we can go? She immediately forgot about the papers and felt his forehead. What's wrong? Let me take you to the hospital. She started to gather the documents, ready to pull him to his feet. A flash of panic crossed Ethan's eyes. He quickly grabbed her hand, shaking his head. No, it's fine, really. Just sign this, and we can go home. Worried about his condition, Sarah didn't give the document a second glance. She quickly signed her name where his finger was pointing. The day Daniel received the signed divorce agreement, a smile of pure relief spread across his face. Soon, after the 1-month waiting period, it would all be over. For the rest of his life, he and Sarah Miller would have nothing to do with each other. A week later, a call came from the Miller family estate. It was the annual family dinner, and, as the husband of the eldest granddaughter, Daniel's attendance was mandatory. At first, Daniel didn't want to go. He and Sarah were about to be divorced. After all, it was better to keep his distance. But then he thought of everything the Millers had done for him, and he decided to go. The Miller estate. The grand hall was brilliantly lit, with magnificent crystal chandeliers glittering from the high ceiling. Beautifully dressed men and women mingled in small groups, their laughter and cheerful chatter filling the air as they sipped from crystal glasses. Daniel, dressed in a white suit, smiled and nodded politely to the relatives he passed. He made his way up the grand staircase to a smaller reception room to pay his respects to old Mr. Miller and Sarah's parents. By the time he was done, his face ached from maintaining a constant smile. Just before dinner was served, he decided to slip away to the guest wing for a moment of quiet, but a voice stopped him. Daniel. He turned to see Sarah standing just out of the light, her expression unreadable in the shadows. Daniel, you're not a child. You've been gone for days, ignoring my messages, not answering my calls. If word gets out that you've run away, how do you think that will make the Miller family look? You're moving back home tonight. Sarah's tone was that of a parent scolding a misbehaving child. She was, as always, perfectly composed. Her voice was casual, calm, and full of authority. Every sentence was a lecture, with not a single word about feelings. Perhaps that was because she had never felt anything for him. It sounded like advice, but it was a warning. His long lashes hid the bitter irony in his eyes. Move back home. The divorce papers were signed. She just didn't know it yet. She didn't know they weren't a family anymore. Daniel was about to speak, but the head butler hurried over and called her away. He let out a long sigh. It was too late to go back to the guest wing now. He decided to get some air by the reflection pool instead. He had just reached the edge of the pool when an arm blocked his path. Daniel. He looked up to see Ethan frowning at him, his eyes filled with a clear warning. I thought we agreed you wouldn't cause any more trouble. What is this? I knew a guy like you would never give up the title of Sarah Miller's husband so easily. Daniel's voice remained soft and even. "The papers are signed. Why would I continue to pursue her? Don't worry. I no longer care about that title. Once the waiting period is over, I'll be gone." With that, he turned to walk away. Ethan stomped his foot, about to follow him, when a sudden scream came from the top of the grassy slope nearby. Both men looked up, their faces instantly draining of color. Two children on scooters were careening down the hill, heading straight for them. "Look out!" There were two loud splashes. Both men had been knocked into the pool. The icy water shocked the breath out of them. Daniel had always been afraid of water, and the more he struggled to swim towards the edge, the more his limbs flailed in panic. He kept sinking. He fought his way back to the surface, and in that brief moment, he saw Sarah rushing to the edge of the pool and diving in. He didn't cry out for help, only managing to swallow mouthfuls of chlorinated water as he thrashed. His head throbbed, and it became harder and harder to breathe. In the next instant, he saw Sarah swimming through the water, heading unhesitatingly for Ethan. He wasn't surprised, just filled with a bleak sense of resignation. No matter the time or place, she would always choose Ethan. He would always be the one left behind. The sounds around him faded, and the strength left his limbs. His body slowly sank towards the bottom of the pool. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel opened his eyes again. He saw a group of family elders gathered around the bed, their eyes filled with concern and relief. They had formed a circle around him and Sarah, but they kept a respectful distance, hesitant to step closer. After offering a few words of encouragement, they slowly departed. Seeing that he was awake, Sarah, who was sitting by his bedside, took his hand. For the first time, he saw a look of genuine pain and sympathy in her eyes. "Daniel, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The words, though few, made his mind go completely blank. What did she just say? She was pregnant? Daniel slowly raised a hand and placed it on Sarah's stomach, trying to feel the new life within. His heart was a tangle of complicated emotions. This child had come at the worst possible time. Seeing the lack of joy in his expression, Sarah assumed he was still upset about the incident at the pool. "I know you're upset about what happened, but you understand why I had to help him, right? For the sake of our child." Even now, she still thought this was about the pool. And even if it were, she had never offered an explanation for her choice. She just assumed his personality meant he would let it go. In the past, he would have listened to her reasoning. But now, he had no interest in hearing her excuses. Daniel's expression was placid as he slowly pulled his hand away. "I'm tired. You're pregnant. You should get some rest." Sir didn't think anything of it, standing up. "I'm fine. You rest. I'm going to go check on Ethan." Because of the pool incident and Sarah's pregnancy, everyone at the estate began to dote on them. A steady stream of expensive gifts and health supplements arrived at their rooms. But Daniel knew Sarah was only acting this way because the pregnancy had made her sentimental. For the past few days, she had been constantly by his side, which made him deeply uncomfortable. They had rarely shared a room since their wedding. And after she had gone to help Ethan with his divorce, they had become complete strangers living under the same roof. Now, she sat beside him, reviewing some documents, her every breath audible in the quiet room. This was a scene he had once longed for, but now that it was a reality, he felt no joy, only a growing sense of irritation. But she was pregnant, and his own principles prevented him from being cruel. So he simply closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. When Ethan heard the staff talking about Sarah's pregnancy, he gritted his teeth, his eyes flashing with anger. Daniel had agreed to a divorce, to a clean break. Now Sarah was pregnant. Was he backing out of the deal, refusing to give up his position? That's what he thought, and that's what he intended to ask. When Sarah had to leave for an urgent business matter, Ethan took the opportunity to go to Daniel's room. Daniel acted as if he hadn't heard him, calmly turning a page in his book. His composure only infuriated Ethan more. "Daniel, I'm talking to you." Daniel closed his book and looked up. "When did I say I wouldn't give you the position?" he asked mildly. Ethan's face was a mask of astonishment. He had assumed Daniel's talk of divorce was just a bluff. Now that Sarah was pregnant with his child, his position was more secure than ever. It would have been perfectly normal for him to call the whole thing off. He never expected Daniel to be so determined. "Then what about the baby?" Ethan asked, and as he spoke, a look of horror dawned on his face. "You wouldn't." Daniel's expression remained calm. "Sarah has people watching me. I can't find an opportunity to leave the estate. I need you to create a distraction for me." Ethan agreed. Before he left, he asked Daniel one last question. You've put up with it for so many years. Why are you so insistent on leaving now? Daniel was silent for a long time. Just as Ethan reached the door, he heard the quiet reply. Because I'm not happy. He had known from the very beginning that Sarah loved Ethan. For all those years, he had endured it when she flew overseas to be with Ethan, to comfort Ethan, her heart always with Ethan. Enduring for a year, for 5 years, for a lifetime, it was all just enduring. He had tried to tell himself it wasn't so bad, that he would get used to it, that things would get better. But the sleepless nights and the torment in his soul were always accompanied by 3 words that churned inside him, impossible to ignore. I'm not happy. Sarah, in all our years of marriage, I have been so deeply, truly unhappy. A person only gets about 30,000 days in this life. From now on, I just want to live a life that belongs to Daniel Hayes. I'm done trying to please a woman who doesn't love me. Late one night, an exhausted Sarah returned home. She was just about to open the door to Daniel's room when her phone rang. She answered. Ethan's panicked sobs came through the receiver. Sarah, my ex-wife. She's here again, she's... The line went dead. Forgetting all about Daniel, Sarah grabbed the household security team and rushed out. Moments after she left, Daniel slipped out of his room in a trench coat, completely unnoticed. When Sarah arrived at Ethan's apartment building, the street outside was empty. She burst inside and found Ethan huddled in a corner, trembling. The moment he saw her, he ran into her arms like a man who had just escaped death, his eyes red-rimmed. Sarah, you're finally here. I was so scared. Sarah gently patted his back, her voice soft. It's okay now. She's gone. Ethan clung to her, his voice choked with sobs, the very picture of a damsel in distress. It took a long time for Sarah's comforting words to finally calm him down. She glanced at her watch. It was well past midnight. A thought of Daniel, home alone, sent a strange and unexpected pang of anxiety through her. After she helped him into bed, she said patiently, You get some rest. I need to go back and check on Daniel. Ethan grabbed her hand, his eyes instantly filling with tears again. Sarah, she could come back any time. I am terrified. Please, can't you just stay with me for one night? Sarah hesitated, but his pleading and tears wore her down. She sent the security team home and agreed to stay. Lying on the operating table, staring up at the surgical light, Daniel answered the incoming call. It's Ethan's ex-wife. That psycho is harassing him again. I have to stay here with him to make sure he's safe. I'll be back in a few days. Daniel's voice was calm, as gentle and accommodating as ever. Don't worry about it. You just take care of Mr. Vance. Sarah was taken aback, but before she could say anything else, he had already hung up. A week later, once she was sure Ethan was safe, Sarah finally drove back to the estate. As she got out of the car, she saw Daniel on the veranda, relaxing in a rocking chair with a blanket over his lap, enjoying the sun. She walked over and handed him a small box. I know I've been neglecting you lately. This is for you. Daniel took it, his gaze lowered. The gift was a gift with purchase, a freebie. The actual, expensive item it came with was something Ethan had proudly shown off in a photo he'd sent just yesterday. But Daniel said nothing, simply accepting the box and setting it aside. His placid reaction felt wrong to Sarah, though she couldn't say why. An unsettling feeling churned inside her. Instead of leaving, she sat down beside him. Next weekend is our 5th anniversary. We should finally have a proper wedding ceremony. Daniel looked at her. She was talking about their wedding, supposedly to make up for her recent neglect. Yet her eyes were as dispassionate as ever, as if she were discussing a business transaction. In the past, this would have sent a wave of bitterness through him, a heavy cloud that would settle over him with no escape. Now, however, his heart was a placid lake, protected from any storm by a wall of indifference. Seeing no objection from him, Sarah began making calls, flying in a designer from Paris to create a custom gown. Looking at the designs on the tablet, Daniel's mind drifted back. They had married in a hurry, just a license, with the promise of a ceremony later. But then she had gotten a call that Ethan's ex-wife was attacking him, and she had flown out of the country that very night. After that, it was one Ethan-related emergency after another, and the wedding never happened. Now she wanted to make it up to him, but he felt nothing. He was already on his way out. It was far too late. 3 days before the wedding. The Miller estate was once again buzzing with activity in preparation for the ceremony. The staff was so busy that no one noticed a figure slip quietly into the formal wear fitting room. When Ethan arrived, Daniel handed him the tablet. We're about the same size, so the tuxedo was tailored to my measurements. You should try it on now. If anything doesn't fit, you can make the notes on the tablet, and I'll have the designer make the alterations. Ethan looked at him, confused. But it's your wedding. Why am I trying it on? Daniel's voice was quiet. The day of the ceremony is also the day our divorce waiting period ends. I'll be able to finalize the papers and walk away. The wedding can't be without a groom, so you're the perfect replacement. You're the only one she's ever wanted to marry anyway. I hope you both get what you've always wanted. As he spoke these words, Daniel's eyes showed no trace of sadness or regret. It was only then that Ethan truly understood Daniel didn't love Sarah anymore. 2 days before the wedding, Daniel was in the bathroom getting ready for bed while Sarah worked on some files from the sofa. The clear chime of a text alert broke the silence. Sarah glanced at his phone on the nightstand, and a message on the lock screen caught her eye. Your flight is confirmed. UA 1082 from JFK on October 1st at 9 a.m. Passenger, Daniel Hayes. Just as she reached for the phone to get a better look, Daniel came out of the bathroom, toweling his hair dry as he walked toward the bed. She looked up at him. The wedding is in 2 days. Why did you book a flight? His hand paused for a fraction of a second before he resumed, his expression neutral. What flight? You must have seen it wrong. It was probably just a spam text. She nodded, thinking nothing more of it. After the lights went out, they lay in bed back to back. One of them quickly fell asleep, while the other stared into the darkness until dawn. The day before the wedding, Daniel took out the journal he had started on their wedding night. He turned the pages slowly. October 1st, 2019. I married the woman I love today, but my bride left for Europe tonight just to see her first love in his wedding tuxedo. The page was wrinkled and stiff where his tears had dried. He ran his fingers over it before turning to the next entry. December 31st, 2020. The first time I've ever had someone to celebrate New Year's Eve with. But I'm not happy. The place she brought me is his favorite spot. Is she here to ring in the new year with me? Or to remember him? I think it's the latter. October 1st, 2021. Our anniversary. I'm still not happy. The restaurant she chose is where she first told him she loved him. August 29th, 2024. Her first love is back in the country. I know it's time for me to leave. The thick journal chronicled all his emotions over the past 5 years, a record of a marriage that was doomed from the start. But that didn't matter anymore. Today, it was finally coming to an end. He picked up his pen and wrote one final entry on the last page. September 30th, 2024. I've decided to leave. Sarah, I'm done with you. He placed the journal, the doctor's report from his procedure, and the divorce agreement in the nightstand drawer. He stood and took one last look around the room, which was decorated for the celebration. A slow smile spread across his face, his eyes filled with the promise of freedom. As a clock chimed somewhere in the house, he slipped out and vanished into the night. The day of the wedding. The chapel was softly decorated with flowers and white tulle. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful, dancing patterns of light and adding a warm, romantic glow to the sacred space. Sarah stood at the end of the rose-lined aisle. This was supposed to be just a formality, a makeup ceremony. But as she stood at the altar, she was surprised to find a genuine sense of anticipation fluttering in her chest. She had never seen Daniel in a tuxedo. The image of herself in a wedding gown, walking slowly towards him, made her heart beat a little faster. As the music played, the groom watched his bride approach, her face obscured by a delicate white veil. Do you, Ethan Vance, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? The groom nodded. Do. And do you, Sarah Miller, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? She nodded. Do. As applause filled the chapel, the officiant pronounced them husband and wife. A genuine smile touched the corners of Sarah's eyes. But when the man reached to lift her veil for the kiss, she instinctively clutched it, holding it in place. Thinking she was just being shy, he leaned in and whispered, "It's okay, Sarah. Don't be nervous." The moment she saw his face, her pupils contracted. Ethan. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. After a moment of shock, she composed herself, the smile vanishing from her face as she grabbed his arm. Luckily, Ethan had his back to the guests. Only those in the front row could possibly see his face. She quickly regained her composure. holding him firmly to keep him from turning towards the crowd. Sarah turned to the guests with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, everyone. I'm suddenly not feeling well. I need to take a short break." The guests exchanged knowing glances and quieted down. Only a few who knew the real story began to whisper amongst themselves. The reception began, and everyone expected the bride and groom to make their entrance for the toasts after changing their clothes. But Sarah's parents waited and waited, and the couple never appeared. At first, Mrs. Miller assumed they were just taking their time. But as the reception began to wind down, there was still no sign of them. She turned to a member of the staff. "Go upstairs and see what's keeping them." The staffer nodded, went upstairs, and knocked on the door of the private suite. "Sir, ma'am, Mr. and Mrs. Miller have asked that you come down as soon as you've changed." After a long silence, a woman's voice came from inside. "We know. You can go." Once the staff member had left, Sarah turned to the man before her, her brow furrowed. "Why was that you?" Ethan's eyes immediately reddened. "Why shouldn't it have been me?" "Sarah, were you really going to go through with this wedding to Daniel? If things had been different, I should have been the one marrying you today. I'm just taking back what was always supposed to be mine." His broken sobs filled the room, but for the first time, watching him cry, she felt no patience to comfort him. She pinched the bridge of her nose. "Ethan, now is not the time for this. You have to understand, this isn't just any wedding. This is the first time I'm publicly announcing my marriage. It's a huge deal. My name and Daniel's have been on the front page of every society column. The entire city knows he's the groom. If word gets out that we switch grooms at the last second, the fallout would be catastrophic. I'm trying to protect you." But Ethan didn't want to hear it. To him, her refusal to announce the switch meant she didn't really love him. "Sarah, if you really loved me, you'd go down there right now and tell everyone. Otherwise, I'm leaving." He stood to leave, but she blocked the door. He smiled inwardly. He knew she couldn't let him go. But her next words were like a slap in the face. "You can't leave this room yet." Ethan's face fell. "What do you mean?" Sarah explained. "If you go out now and someone sees you, it will only make things worse. Ethan, just stay in here until the guests have left." Without another look at him, she closed the door and left him there. He was left standing alone in the room. Ethan's fists clenched. He had always assumed becoming Sarah's husband would be easy. She loved him, and Daniel had practically handed him the opportunity on a silver platter. Now he had finally taken Daniel's place at the altar. All she had to do was acknowledge him in front of everyone, and the world would know that he was her one true love. And since she loved him so much, he was sure she would make everything right. But reality had dealt him a harsh blow. Not only had she immediately hidden his face behind her veil, but she had also hustled him upstairs before he could even process what was happening. And now she was forbidding him from leaving the room. Ethan looked at his reflection in the mirror. The handsome face he had always been so proud of was starting to show its age. After his messy divorce, the kind of women he wanted were no longer considering him husband material. Sarah was his only ticket back into the world of the wealthy. So why would he possibly do as she said? Downstairs, Mrs. Miller saw Sarah descending the stairs alone and approached her with a concerned look. "Why are you by yourself? Where's Daniel? And why was Ethan standing up there with you?" Sarah masked her annoyance and replied calmly, "Mom, you know he's been unwell ever since that incident at the pool. He's still running a fever, so I told him to stay upstairs and rest. Ethan is about the same build, so I asked him to stand in for a moment. I should go out now." Mrs. Miller finally relaxed. "All right then, go and make the round with the guests." Sarah nodded and was just picking up a glass of wine to head into the reception hall when a tearful, wounded voice called out from behind her. "Sarah!" The sudden cry caused all the guests to look up, including Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Sarah spun around to face the source of the voice. There stood Ethan at the top of the stairs, still in a white tuxedo, looking at her with tears welling in his eyes. Mrs. Miller's face hardened, and she was about to signal security to have him removed. But Ethan rushed down the stairs and threw himself into Sarah's arms. "Sarah, I was the one who married you today. Why won't you let me greet the guests? Is it because you don't love me?" With those two sentences, the guests instantly understood what had happened. A wave of whispers spread through the room. Sarah could no longer maintain her composure. She grabbed his arm and hissed under her breath, "Ethan, this is not the time to be throwing a tantrum." He ignored her, his voice growing louder. "I know you don't love Daniel. Why else would you drop everything and fly across the world for me? Time after time. You helped me with my divorce. You picked me up from the airport. You let me stay in your home. If you didn't love me, why would you do all that for me?" He tugged at the lapels of his tuxedo. "Look, Even this tuxedo was tailored for me. So you do love me, don't you? Idiot, Mrs. Miller cursed inwardly, though her face remained a mask of polite composure. She gave a subtle signal to the head of staff. The man stepped forward and addressed the guests smoothly. My apologies, everyone. That gentleman is not feeling well and is having a bit of a confused episode. We ask for your understanding. With that, he gestured toward the exit. The guests, understanding this was a private family matter, began to depart, their minds buzzing with the fresh gossip. The Millers could do nothing about the stories they would tell. The moment the last guest was out the door, Mrs. Miller's polite smile vanished, and she slapped Ethan hard across the face. You little snake. Mom. Even though Sarah knew Ethan was in the wrong, she couldn't bear to see her mother hit him. She stepped between them, shielding him. Sarah. Ethan cradled his reddening cheek, tears spilling down his face as if he had just realized the gravity of his mistake. I know I shouldn't have done that. I just love you so much, that's why I... His voice trailed off as he broke down into quiet, choked sobs. His pitiful display tugged at her heartstrings, and she pulled him into an embrace. It's okay. I'm not blaming you. Mrs. Miller fought the urge to roll her eyes and spoke in an icy tone. I don't care what you were thinking, but you had no right to ruin my daughter's wedding. Ethan's face went pale. He peeked out from the safety of Sarah's arms. Mrs. Miller, don't you dare call me that. As Sarah was comforting Ethan, the head of staff approached Mrs. Miller and showed her his phone. When she saw the headline, all pretense of composure vanished. She yanked him out of her daughter's arms and slapped him again, even harder this time. Ethan Vance, you worthless parasite. You took my money and promised you would never come back. And now, not even 5 years later, here you are, sinking your claws into my daughter again, pulling these disgusting stunts. Are you determined to ruin our family? Sarah seized on her mother's words and looked at the man she was holding. What money? What did you take from my mother? Sarah, I never took any money. Ethan denied it instantly. Mrs. Miller ignored him and shoved the phone in front of her daughter's face. Look at what this creature you're protecting has done. When Sarah saw the headline, she looked up at her mother in disbelief. Ethan, what is this? The guests at the wedding had all witnessed the groom-swapping incident, but they knew it was a private Miller family affair. They would gossip amongst themselves, of course, but none would leak it to the press. And yet, here it was, the #1 trending topic on Twitter, #MillerWeddingSwap. Mrs. Miller couldn't imagine who else but Ethan would have done this. Ethan looked guilty. Before he had gone downstairs, he'd been afraid Sarah wouldn't acknowledge him as her husband, so he had preemptively leaked the story to a tabloid and paid them to get it trending on Twitter. This way, to save face, the family would have no choice but to accept him. But things had not gone according to his plan. Seeing the truth on his face, Sarah closed her eyes in pain. Why Ethan? She had agreed to the ceremony with Daniel, but it was only meant as an apology for her recent neglect. The man she truly loved had always been Ethan. She would have given him anything, except for a wedding and a child. But she had never imagined he would stoop to public blackmail to force her hand. She couldn't begin to imagine what this would do to the Miller Corporation's stock price. She opened her eyes and looked at the man before her, and for the first time, he seemed like a complete stranger. Ethan grabbed her hand in a panic, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah, please, let me explain. I didn't want to do this. I just love you so much. Love, Mrs. Miller said, shaking out her stinging hand as she sat back down. If you really love my daughter, why did you come to me all those years ago asking for money to leave the country? Sarah's head snapped up to look at her mother. Mom, what are you talking about? All these years, she had believed her mother had disapproved of Ethan and had paid him to leave. It was the reason she had kept her distance from her mother for years, only visiting the estate on holidays. But now, she was hearing that Ethan had been the one to ask for the money. The long-buried secret was suddenly exposed. Ethan collapsed to the floor, his face ashen, tears streaming down his cheeks, unable to offer a single word of defense. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped Sarah's lips. She had grieved his departure for so long, had invented so many excuses for him, only to find out he had sold their love for a payoff. The pure, innocent love of her youth was shattered in that instant. The idealized image of her first love, once so perfect in her memory, was now tarnished and ugly. Ethan began to sob in earnest. I didn't want to. I didn't. But the gap between our families was too great. I knew I would never be accepted. It was the only thing I could do. Rather than watch the love of his life marry someone from her own world, he He had decided to take the money and run. In the end, it was clear that Ethan only ever cared about himself. He always put his own interests first. As a young man, terrified of having nothing, he had chosen money over love. And now, to secure a comfortable future, he had exploited Sarah's love for him, causing irreparable damage. Sarah walked over to him and knelt down, looking at him with a mixture of finality and lingering affection. Ethan, back then, I truly believed we had a future together. I would have given up everything for you, fought against the whole world just to be with you. But he had given up on her before she ever had the chance to fight for them. A look of terror slowly dawned in Ethan's eyes as he realized he had lost something for good. Sarah! Sarah! His heart-wrenching cries echoed through the grand house. But the woman he called for walked out into the night without a single backward glance. To get the story off the trending topics and reassure the company's shareholders, Sarah spent the next week living at her office. Under the dim office lights, her bloodshot eyes were glued to a computer screen as the phone beside her rang incessantly. Finally, she slumped back in her chair and answered. Mom. Her mother's calm voice came through the line. Forget about the Twitter fiasco and the company for now. Your father will handle it. Right now, you need to go find your husband. You're pregnant, and your grandfather has been asking about him constantly. The reception had run late, and old Mr. Miller had retired to his room right after the ceremony, so he was blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded. He was getting on in years and couldn't handle that kind of stress, so the family was trying to keep it from him. Her mother's words reminded her. From the wedding until now, the actual groom had never shown his face. She opened her contacts and dialed his number, but the call went straight to voicemail. She tried several more times with the same result. A quick search online confirmed her suspicion. He had blocked her number. She frowned and dialed her assistant. Find out where my husband is. Now, how could Daniel just disappear like this? She thought he had been looking forward to the wedding. Daniel knew when he left that if Sarah really wanted to find him, it would be laughably easy. So, when he opened the door of his apartment an ocean away and saw her standing on his doorstep, he wasn't the least bit surprised. He had seen the news about the groom swapping incident. In the video, Sarah was the picture of calm as she had Ethan keep his back to the crowd while she coolly announced she was unwell and they would be simplifying the proceedings. Just as he'd thought. She didn't care about him at all. He looked at the woman leaning against the rental car, his eyes empty of any warmth. What are you doing here? The man before her was dressed in a simple gray suit, his face bare. It was a stark contrast to the meticulously put-together man from the villa. For a moment, he seemed like a stranger. You've made your point. It's time to come home now. Perhaps sensing the harshness in her own tone, she added, Grandfather keeps asking for you. And everyone is so excited about our baby. Made his point. They were divorced, and she thought he was just sulking. Daniel didn't even look at her as he stated, matter-of-factly, Miss Miller, we're divorced. I'm done with you. The word divorce made Sarah laugh as if he'd told a joke. Divorce? I never signed any papers. How can we be divorced? She grabbed his arm. I don't have time for this. You're coming back with me now. Do you want our child to grow up without a father? Daniel didn't budge. Sarah, if you don't believe me, go back to the house. You'll find the divorce agreement in the nightstand drawer. It has your signature on it. She froze, her brow knitting together in a sharp frown. Daniel, I don't have time for your jokes. But his expression was dead serious. There was no hint of a joke in his eyes. A flicker of panic entered her cool gaze, but her grip on his arm tightened. When would I have signed divorce papers? And even if I had, my family would never allow it. Then, as if remembering her trump card, her gaze softened as she looked down at her stomach. Besides, I'm pregnant. You can't abandon our child. This time, a smile did touch his lips, but the words that followed were ice cold. You mean the child? How can I be sure the child is mine? I saw your medical report, Sarah. We weren't even intimate around the time of conception. He had found it the night he left. The knowledge that the child wasn't his had erased any last shred of doubt about his decision. When did you see that report? The night you ran off to Ethan's. I found the lab results you'd hidden in the nightstand. Do whatever you want with the child. It's not mine. She grabbed his shoulders, her fingers digging in. How dare you, Daniel? How dare you? He watched as her face turned pale and her usually cool, detached eyes filled with a storm of anger and pain. Pain, indignation, rage. But all Daniel felt was a sense of profound satisfaction. What was her momentary pain compared to the 5 years of his marriage? He pried her fingers from his shoulders, one by one. For the first time in a long time, he gave a genuine, beautiful smile. Why wouldn't I dare? A child born under these circumstances is destined for a life of misery. Daniel had thought it through. Even if the child were born, he could never treat it as his own. A child unloved by its parents is doomed to an unhappy life. But you love me, don't you? Why can't you accept my child? He'll still call you Dad. When he's born, she yelled, her voice filled with rage. Daniel looked at her, his eyes dripping with sarcasm. Why should I care about a child that isn't mine? Sarah, are you insane? Did you really believe that no matter how you trampled on my dignity, I would never leave you? So what if you're pregnant? One phone call from Ethan, and you drop everything to run to his side, without a single thought for our child you're carrying. I don't want to have to explain to a child why his mother never comes home. I don't want him to go through what I went through. Sarah, you're not fit to be a mother, and neither am I. Seeing the redness in his eyes, she felt as if a hand were squeezing her throat. A bitter taste filled her mouth, and she couldn't speak. Her hands fell from his shoulders. After a long silence, she finally spoke. What happened with Ethan is in the past. I'll get rid of the baby. So, yes, it's in the past. So don't come here again. He turned to close the door, but was stopped by the urgent ringing of his phone. In the end, Daniel boarded the flight home with Sarah. They went straight to the hospital from the airport. It turned out that Mrs. Miller had found the documents Daniel had left in the nightstand. She had read the journal, and the shock had been too much for her heart. She had been rushed to the hospital. Looking at Mrs. Miller's pale face, Daniel was filled with guilt. With the exception of Sarah, the entire Miller family had always been kind to him, especially her mother, who often called just to see how he was doing. Mrs. Miller, I'm so sorry. She sighed and patted his hand reassuringly. You have nothing to be sorry for. This is all my daughter's fault. Mrs. Miller remembered the first time she had met him. He had been so bright-eyed and full of drive, dressed in old but clean clothes, blushing as he introduced himself. And now, after only 5 years of marriage, those same eyes were filled with despair. She had tried to reason with her daughter, but Sarah was so obsessed with Ethan that she wouldn't listen. That things had come to this. She could only blame her daughter's foolishness. Back at the estate, Mr. Miller looked at his daughter with profound disappointment. His daughter had always been his pride. Even as a child, she had been so mature and capable, never giving him or his wife a moment's worry. But when it came to her own marriage, she had acted like a spoiled child, thoughtless and completely oblivious to her husband's feelings. She had brought this on herself. Don't go see your mother for a few days. The sight of you will only upset her more. Go to your room and think long and hard about what you've done. Back in their suite, Sarah paced the room, agitated. She had never imagined things would turn out like this. The room was exactly as Daniel had left it. On her vanity sat the simple wedding band he had never worn. She picked it up. A thin layer of dust had settled on the plain gold ring. She stared at the ring, her mind drifting. When they were planning the ceremony, she had actually taken half a day off to go ring shopping with him. The jeweler had presented a tray of elaborate, gemstone-encrusted rings, each one glittering under the showroom lights. Sarah had assumed no one could resist a large, flashy diamond. If he didn't find one he liked, she was prepared to take him to a friend's private studio, where the selection was even more exquisite. But to her surprise, Daniel's gaze had bypassed the glittering tray entirely. He had tapped on a quiet corner of the display case. Tucked away, there was a simple, unadorned band. Inexpensive, with no design. Looking back now, she realized he must have been so utterly disillusioned with their marriage that he couldn't even be bothered to choose a proper ring. She dropped the ring and sank back onto the sofa. She ran her hands through her hair in frustration, and her eyes fell upon the journal lying on the coffee table. What could possibly be written in it that would make her unflappable mother faint from shock? Driven by a sudden, intense curiosity, she picked it up. Her hand froze as she read the first entry. October 1st, 2019. I married the woman I love today, but my bride left for Europe tonight just to see her first love in his wedding tuxedo. She had done it out of spite, deliberately getting her marriage license on the same day as Ethan's wedding, wanting to show him she was better off without him. But when she saw a photo of him in his tuxedo on Facebook, that spite had curdled into a bitter longing. She just had to see him in person. So, without a word of explanation, she had abandoned her new husband and flown out of the country. A wave of guilt washed over her. She traced the wrinkled, tear-stained paper, her lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't hard to imagine how heartbroken he must have been crying as he wrote those words. December 31st, 2020. The first time I've ever had someone to celebrate New Year's Eve with. But I'm not happy. The place she brought me is where she first told him she loved him. October 1st, 2021. Our anniversary. I'm still not happy. The venue she chose was where her first love got married. August 2024. Her first love is back in the country. I know it's time for me to leave. The thick journal was a 5-year record of a man's marriage. It chronicled his journey from hopeful anticipation to utter despair. On all those nights she had left him for Ethan, he had sat under a dim light, recording his pain. A heavy, suffocating feeling filled the room, and her heart felt as if it were being squeezed in a vice, making it hard to breathe. She could almost see him, his face streaked with tears, meticulously describing the misery of his marriage. Outside, the sun sank below the clouds, and the first stars began to appear. Under the lamplight, her slender fingers turned to the final page. September 30th, 2024. The eve of the wedding. I've decided to leave. Sarah, I'm done with you. A single tear fell onto the page, blurring the ink. She touched her cheek and was surprised to find it wet. She hadn't even realized she was crying. The lights in their suite stayed on all night. The next morning, when Daniel saw her, he almost didn't recognize her. The woman before him was pale, her eyes were bloodshot, and her lips were colorless. And when she looked at him, her eyes were filled with an emotion he had never seen there before: guilt. A housekeeper nodded a polite greeting to her before turning to Daniel. Sir, your room is this way. Although they were divorced, Mr. and Mrs. Miller hadn't told the staff, wanting to keep the news from the old man. So, the unknowing housekeeper still addressed him as Sir. The title sent an unexpected warmth through her, a reminder of how things used to be. But then the memory of the journal surfaced, and the light in her eyes faded. She was about to call out to him, but the door to his room closed firmly in her face. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. In that moment, she made a decision, as she told no one. Sarah went to the hospital. Miss Miller, are you absolutely certain? Given your health history, I'm sure. Sarah placed a hand on her stomach, where a new life was just beginning. I'm so sorry, little one, she thought. It's all my fault. I made the wrong choice. I trusted the wrong person. I hope you find a happy family in your next life. Please don't blame me. In the weeks that followed, the entire household staff noticed a change in Sarah. The first to notice was the head housekeeper who had been with her for years. In her memory, her mistress was always gone before dawn and rarely returned before midnight, often drunk. Sometimes, when she went overseas to see Ethan, she would be gone for months at a time. But now, the housekeeper found her at the breakfast table every single morning. She would wait there until Daniel came downstairs, showing no signs of leaving. It wasn't just the staff who found this unsettling. Daniel was even more uncomfortable. Since returning to the estate, the person he saw most often was Sarah. He couldn't understand where she suddenly found all this free time to just stay at home, her gaze constantly following him. It made his skin crawl, but Mrs. Miller had explained that the old man's health was failing. He might not have much time left, and what her grandfather loved most was having the whole family together under one roof. So, Mrs. Miller had begged him to stay at the estate for a little while longer. She promised that aside from keeping up appearances for her father, he would be left completely alone. If Sarah's presence bothered him, she said, she would have her husband send her away on business. Remembering the kind old man who had welcomed him so warmly all those years ago, Daniel's resolve softened. He agreed to stay a while longer. Mrs. Miller immediately had a guest suite prepared for him. Perhaps it was the divorce, but Daniel's entire demeanor had changed. He ate well and slept well. He spent his days walking the grounds with Mrs. Miller and helping her in the garden. The only thing that unsettled him was the way Sarah was always watching him with those guilt-ridden eyes. It gave him goosebumps. So, whenever he saw her, he pretended she wasn't there. As a result, they hadn't exchanged a single word since his return. That is, until old Mr. Miller's 80th birthday party. She finally saw her chance to speak with him. During the party, Daniel, smiling warmly, presented his gift for Mr. Miller to the head of staff. Grandfather, many happy returns. The old man laughed, delighted. It does my heart good to see you and Sarah so happy together. Now I can rest easy. Daniel's heart warmed. He nodded, and after a brief chat with Sarah's parents, he excused himself to go upstairs. He was just about to close his bedroom door when a hand shot out and stopped it. Hearing a muffled cry of pain, he quickly pulled the door open again and saw its owner. Sarah. The faint smile on Daniel's face vanished instantly. What do you want? Sarah pushed her way into the room, looking as if she wanted to throw herself into his arms. He took a guarded step backward, his brow furrowed. If you have something to say, then say it. But don't touch me. His retreat sent a sharp pang through her heart. Seeing her hesitate, unable to speak, Daniel lost all patience for the conversation. He walked to the door and held it open for her. If you have something to say, say it. Otherwise, please leave. I'm going to bed. Sarah finally took a deep breath and looked at him earnestly. Daniel, I wanted to say I'm sorry. How random. That was his first thought. What are you apologizing for? She gave a bitter smile. I read your journal. I had no idea how much I'd hurt you. And his eyes were completely flat, as if he were listening to a story about a stranger. A look of pain filled Sarah's eyes. I truly never knew how much pain you were in all those times I left for Ethan. And I took care of the baby. I really want to start over with you. Her remorse was so laughable. Hurt. In her eyes, all he had suffered during their 5-year marriage was a little bit of hurt feelings. That was all. She had no idea that beyond the hurt, there was the crushing weight of neglect, night after night. The countless sleepless nights he had spent alone. The forced smile he had to put on every morning to face the world, terrified that someone might see how unhappy he was and mock him, or worse, pity him. He had been playing a part for so long, he had become numb. And now, all she could see was that he'd been hurt. For the first time, Daniel took a long, hard look at the woman before him. The regret and pain in her eyes seemed genuine. But if only she had shown this remorse on their wedding night, before she left to see her first love get married. Or earlier, on the day they got their license. Or even on the day they first met, when she had asked him to marry her. If she had given him a sincere apology then, he wouldn't have been trapped in the prison of their marriage for 5 years. He wouldn't have had to spend every day wearing a mask. He wouldn't have spent his nights crying while pouring his heart out into a journal. Her apology was too late. 5 years too late. So he rejected it. He refused to listen to another word and pushed her out of the room. I'm tired. I don't want to hear any more. The door closed firmly in her face once more. For the rest of the evening, she didn't get another chance to speak to him. She could only stand beside him, watching as he smiled and bid farewell to each of the guests. She followed him back towards the guest wing. As they were passing the reflection pool, chaos suddenly erupted. Look out! Get back! One of the guests had gifted Mr. Miller a live deer from a game reserve. As the staff were trying to move it to an enclosure after the party, the animal had gotten spooked and was now charging straight at them. Daniel's eyes went wide, but his feet felt as if they were nailed to the ground. Suddenly, a powerful shove from behind sent him stumbling to the side. It was Sarah. Daniel, look out! With a loud splash, the deer collided with Sarah, sending her into the pool. The force of the impact sent her head crashing against a decorative rock, and the water around her instantly turned red. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was in a hospital room. Daniel! The only reply was a cold snort from her mother. Daniel's not here. It's just me. Where is he? Is he okay? Was he hurt? She struggled to sit up, but her mother quickly and gently pushed her back down. Don't move. You have a head injury. Don't worry. Daniel is fine. He was just shaken up. He's at home resting. Sarah finally relaxed back onto the pillows, wincing as she accidentally touched her wound. Her mother scoffed, rearranging the pillows for her. Hurts, doesn't it? I imagine it was much worse for Daniel when he fell in the pool. Remembering the deathly pale look on Daniel's face when he was pulled from the water, Mrs. Miller's heart ached. She gave her daughter a few light thumps on the arm out of sheer frustration. What were you thinking? You knew Daniel couldn't swim, but you left your own husband to drown while you saved that worthless snake. Are you happy now? You've driven him away for good. Listening to her mother's tirade, Sarah's heart sank even lower. She was finally beginning to understand the pain Daniel must have felt in that moment. She couldn't imagine his despair. Her hands clenched the blanket tighter. For the next several days, her mother was her only visitor, bringing her meals and looking after her. She wanted to ask about Daniel, but she could never bring herself to say the words. Finally, on the day before she was to be discharged, she couldn't take it anymore. Her mother cut her off with an exasperated eye roll. I know what you're going to ask, and the answer is no. Daniel was badly shaken. He's been running a high fever, and we want him to rest at home in peace. Besides, he's nothing to you now. Why should he come visit you? But he's still my husband. Before she could finish, Her mother gave her a sharp rap on the head. What husband? You're divorced. He's your ex-husband now. But I never agreed to it. Her mother rolled her eyes, so hard it was a wonder they didn't get stuck. She had later had the matter investigated and discovered that her daughter had been tricked by that snake Ethan into signing the papers while she was drunk. Well, maybe you shouldn't have gotten so drunk. Serves you right. The day she returned home from the hospital, she saw Daniel in the main hall. They stood in silence for a moment, until he, perhaps feeling awkward since she had saved his life, broke the silence. Are you feeling any better? He finally asked. She nodded, but before she could reply, her uncle appeared and whisked her away to see her grandfather. The old man leaned on his cane and looked her over. How are you feeling? She sat down beside him. Much better, grandfather. Nothing to worry about. Her aunt smiled. Good. Then I won't feel guilty about stealing your husband for a little trip. Sarah turned to her. A trip? What are you talking about, Aunt Carol? Her aunt linked her arm through Daniel's. Daniel and I have a plan. Now that you're out of the hospital, I'm taking him to Aspen for a few days to relax in the hot springs. Her mother, who had sat down beside her, poured her a glass of water. It's good for them. It gets boring being cooped up in this house all the time. Young people need to get out and about. A wave of disappointment washed over Sarah. She had just gotten home and won a chance to make things right, and now he was leaving. Perhaps sensing her dismay, her aunt spoke up. Why don't you come with us? Her aunt suggested. Her grandfather, however, was not so sure. She just got out of the hospital. It's not good for her to travel. Sarah glanced at Daniel, but his face was a mask of indifference. She turned back to her grandfather. I'll be fine, Grandpa. I've been stuck inside for weeks. I'm bored out of my mind. A little trip would do me good. After a bit more discussion, her aunt clapped her hands together. It's settled then. You're coming with us. And so, the three of them set off on their trip. On the way there, their aunt chattered excitedly about their plans for the next few days, with Sarah and Daniel offering non-committal responses. But it didn't take long for their aunt to notice the strange atmosphere between them. She leaned between their seats, a confused look on her face. You two are being so strange. You're a married couple, but you haven't said a word to each other. You're only talking to me. No one knew about the divorce except for her parents. They both tensed, unsure of what to say. Her aunt clapped her hands, as if in sudden understanding. Oh, I get it. Daniel, you're still mad about the wedding fiasco, aren't you? Don't worry. We'll punish Sarah by making her carry all the luggage. Their light-hearted bickering continued all the way to the resort. After getting their key cards from the front desk, they went to find their rooms. Their aunt waved cheerfully. See you two in a bit. With that, she disappeared into her room and closed the door. They then opened the door to their own room and froze. Their aunt had booked them a suite with a single king-size bed. Daniel turned to leave. I'll go get another room. Sarah quickly blocked his path. Aunt Carol can't keep a secret. If she finds out we're in separate rooms, she'll tell Grandfather the moment we get back. He didn't even look at her as he tried to step around her. Daniel, he finally looked at her, his eyes cold and distant. So what? The whole family knows I'm angry with you about the wedding. It's perfectly reasonable that we wouldn't be sharing a room. What does it matter if Grandfather finds out? This is your fault, isn't it? Besides, what kind of divorced couple shares a room? You might not care, but the thought of it disgusts me. A lump formed in her throat, and she couldn't find the words to reply. He didn't spare her another glance as he walked back to the front desk and booked a separate room. When their aunt emerged a little later, ready for the hot springs, she saw them coming out of two separate rooms. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but then a look of understanding replaced it, and she said nothing. Their aunt had booked a private spring, with a wooden lattice screen separating the men's and women's pools. Daniel sank into the warm water with a long, contented sigh. Sarah, perhaps feeling awkward, had chosen a spot further away. His aunt, however, struck up a conversation with him from the other side of the screen. Somehow, the topic of conversation drifted to Sarah. In the next pool, the woman who had been washing her shoulders froze when she heard her name. Daniel, have you ever thought about giving her a chance to make things right? His aunt had been living abroad and had only returned for her father's birthday. All she knew about their troubles was the wedding incident and the miscarriage. And while she knew it was all Sarah's fault, it seemed to her that Daniel had no intention of ever forgiving her. She was her niece, after all, and she felt she had to at least try to speak up for her. Daniel didn't even open his eyes. After a long pause, he gave a non-committal reply. Maybe someday. In the other pool, the woman heard his reply and gave a small, bitter smile. Seeing that she wasn't getting anywhere, his aunt dropped the subject. It was their business, after all. After their soak, the three of them went to the resort's restaurant for dinner. It was a buffet, so they each grabbed a tray and began to choose their food. Sarah followed behind him, pointing out various dishes she thought he might like. But he rejected every one of her suggestions without a second glance. "I'm allergic to that. I don't like that." "No." The light in her eyes dimmed with each rejection. Her aunt, who had been watching, could no longer stand it. As Daniel walked away to find a table, she gave Sarah a sharp rap on the head. "What are you doing, Sarah? Don't tell me you've been married for 5 years, and you don't even know what he's allergic to." A helpless, bitter smile touched Sarah's lips, her eyes filled with a deep, lonely pain. How could she know? For 5 years, he had been the one to cater to her tastes, her preferences. Whether they were eating out or at home, he always chose the food based on what she liked. And she, in turn, had saved all of her consideration and patience for Ethan. She could list every one of Ethan's favorite foods and allergies from memory, but she couldn't name a single thing Daniel actually enjoyed. The rest of the meal tasted like ash in her mouth. After dinner, they had planned to go to the resort's private ski slope, but they were informed that it was temporarily closed due to the weather conditions. So, they were left to find other entertainment at the resort. Their aunt suggested the hotel bar, but she was called away by an urgent phone call before they could even get there. In the dimly lit bar, only the two of them remained at their table. Daniel, no longer feeling the need to keep up appearances, shrugged off his jacket and started towards the dance floor. It was only then that she saw what he was wearing underneath, a sheer, mesh shirt that clung to his toned torso, leaving little to the imagination. He had always been handsome, with a perfectly sculpted face and clear, bright eyes that seemed to hold a universe of their own. And now, every eye in the bar was on him. The feeling was deeply unpleasant, like watching strangers lust after her most prized possession. Sarah strode over to him, intending to drape her own coat over his shoulders. But with a fluid twist of his hips, he evaded her. "Daniel, Sarah, we're divorced. You have no right to tell me what to do." He tried to pull his arm from her grasp, but she held on tight, her grip like iron. How can you wear something like that in public? In her memory, Daniel was always impeccably, conservatively dressed, his shirts always buttoned to the collar. She had forgotten that before he had married her, he had been his own person, with his own style. And now, they were divorced. She had no right to tell him how to dress. Daniel looked at her, his eyes cold with annoyance. "Let go of me. Sarah, you don't have the right to control me anymore." Her eyes were red with fury as she tried to drag him towards the exit. A sharp crack echoed as his hand connected with her cheek. She touched her stinging face, a flicker of pain in her eyes. "If someone takes a picture of you dressed like that, do you have any idea what it will do to the Miller family's reputation? What if grandfather sees?" "Enough." He finally wrenched his arm free, a cold sneer on his face. "If you don't like it, just say so. Don't hide behind my family's reputation and my grandfather. You're pathetic, Sarah. Do you really think I care? Go ahead, announce the divorce. See if I care." The indifference and sarcasm in his eyes stung her, and a wave of bitterness washed over her heart. He was right. They were divorced. If he cared about any of that, he never would have left her in the first place. Her words echoed in his mind. "And as for the gossip, my family and my grandfather couldn't care less. You seem to have forgotten that from the day I married you, they told me I was free to be myself, to do as I pleased. They never cared about appearances. I was the one who changed myself for you. Well, I'm a free man now. What makes you think I would ever go back to being the person you wanted me to be?" Without another glance at her, he turned and walked onto the dance floor. Watching his body move to the music, a bitter taste filled her mouth. She knew she no longer had any right to say anything to him. The tension between them lasted through the next day. At dinner, neither of them spoke. Their aunt took a bite of her fish, her eyes darting back and forth between them. After she swallowed, she finally spoke, a confused look on her face. "Did you two have another fight while I was gone? Sarah, did you do something to upset Daniel?" Neither of them answered. Their aunt sighed. "You too." Just as she was about to press the issue, Daniel poured her a glass of juice. "It's nothing, Aunt Carol. Let's just drop it." Seeing that he didn't want to talk about it, his aunt reluctantly let the matter go. The moment Daniel had closed the door to his room, his aunt gave Sarah a sharp smack on the back of the head. "What did you do to him while I was gone? I haven't seen him genuinely smile once since we got here. I never should have let you come." She dragged Sarah into her own room and pushed her down onto the sofa. She then sat in the chair opposite, crossing her arms and legs. All right, spill it. What happened between you two? And I don't just mean tonight. I want to know everything. Her aunt had a feeling their problems ran deeper than just the wedding incident and the miscarriage. Seeing the determined look in her aunt's eyes, Sarah knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. So, she told her everything that had happened over the past 5 years. But her aunt still looked skeptical. And you got divorced because of all this? If it were just about Ethan, she reasoned, they would have still shared a room, no matter how angry they were. One of them could have slept on the sofa. But for Daniel to insist on getting a separate room, there had to be a bigger reason. The only thing that made sense was a divorce. Sarah's silence was all the confirmation she needed. How could you do that to him? Her aunt was furious, slapping her on the back several times before she finally stopped. 5 years. You left your husband at home, all alone, for 5 years. You basically made the man live like a monk. How could you be so heartless? What kind of spell did that Ethan cast on you? It serves you right that Daniel left you. I knew there was a reason you, a homebody, were so insistent on coming on this trip, even though you just got out of the hospital. What, you thought you could win him back? You must be dreaming. If I were him, I would have walked out on you and never looked back. Only someone as good-natured as Daniel would even be willing to be in the same car as you. She was right. Daniel was too good-natured for his own good. That's why he had endured 5 years of misery before finally leaving. He hadn't made a scene, hadn't aired their dirty laundry in public, hadn't even had the satisfaction of throwing the divorce papers in her face. He had avoided a confrontation altogether, having Ethan trick her into signing the papers. And it was that same gentle nature that now left her at a complete loss. She had no idea how to even begin to win him back. He was always so calm, so indifferent. She had no idea how to get through to him. She would have preferred him to scream at her, to rage at her, anything but this cold, impenetrable wall he had built around himself. Neither of them slept well that night. The next morning, when Daniel opened his door, he was greeted by the sight of 2 women with dark circles under their eyes. What happened to you two? His aunt waved a dismissive hand. Nothing. I just made her watch a scary movie with me last night. He didn't press the issue, simply grabbing his ski gear and heading for the shuttle to the slopes. The vast, snow-covered landscape glittered under the bright sun. Daniel, dressed in a white ski suit with black goggles, stood at the top of the slope, poles in hand. He pushed off, launching himself down the mountain, executing a flawless jump and landing with perfect form. His aunt, impressed, skied over to him. Daniel, I had no idea you were such a good skier. He smiled. I took some lessons a while back. He had done it back then, hoping to find a way into Sarah's world, asking the housekeeper about her hobbies. He had spent an entire winter at a ski resort, practicing. He had fallen and gotten back up countless times. He had finally convinced her to come skiing with him, and he had been so excited to show her what he had learned. But then, a phone call from Ethan had sent her rushing away. He had been left standing there, watching her retreating back, his eyes filled with a lonely disappointment. He hadn't been skiing since. Now, holding the poles again, he felt a bit rusty. He had forgotten most of what his instructor had taught him. He was so focused that he didn't hear the low, rumbling crack deep within the snowpack. Avalanche! The warning cry sent skiers scattering in every direction, desperately searching for cover. But Daniel had never been in an avalanche before. He froze, watching in horror as a tidal wave of snow thundered down the mountain towards him. Daniel, a dark figure tackled him, knocking him to the ground just as the snow hit. Lean forward. Cover your mouth and nose. A woman's voice, steady but trembling, yelled in his ear. He immediately did as she said. After the roaring subsided, the snow finally settled. Sarah struggled to push herself up and quickly unfastened all of their ski gear. Knowing they had to get out before the snow hardened, they tried to remember their position before the avalanche and figure out which way was up. Then they began to dig. But the snow was too deep and heavy. They dug for what felt like hours, but saw no sign of light. The temperature was dropping rapidly. They had no choice but to stop, huddling together for warmth, conserving their energy and waiting for rescue. To keep him from drifting off, she started talking. She talked endlessly, telling him stories from their past. In another time, he might have been touched, but now his heart felt as cold and heavy as the snow that surrounded them. Seeing his lack of response, she gave a self-mocking smile. She looked at the thick blanket of snow surrounding them and joked, "Well, after going through this, I guess you could say we've died together once." He turned his head away. You could die if you want. I have no intention of dying here." She just smiled and said nothing more. Gradually, Daniel felt his fingers growing numb. The frost on his eyelashes felt heavy, and his movements became sluggish. Sarah's face paled, and she pulled him into a tight embrace. She tried to warm him with her own body heat while gently patting his cheeks. Daniel, please stay with me. Don't fall asleep. You have to stay awake." Just as his eyes were about to close for good, the snow above them was violently thrown aside. A brilliant light flooded their small prison. "We found them. They're over here." When Daniel woke again, the bright light overhead made him shield his eyes. Seeing him awake, his aunt excitedly called for the town's doctor. The avalanche had blocked the only road out of town, cutting them off from the outside world. So for now, they were stranded. Though he and Sarah had been buried, they had been rescued in time and had suffered no serious injuries. His aunt gave him a few words of instruction, left a thermos of soup by his bed, and quietly closed the door. He looked out the window. The sky was overcast, and the heavy, falling snow seemed to press down on the world. It matched his mood perfectly. What was there to be gloomy about? He remembered how she had thrown herself in front of him without a second thought. He remembered how, when he was fading, she had opened her own jacket to press him close, sharing her body heat. In that moment, his heart had warmed just a little, but then his mind turned to the 5 years he had spent waiting alone in an empty house. Every night, he had listened to the ticking of the clock, to the beating of his own heart. He could be sitting by a roaring fire, wrapped in a thick blanket with a cup of hot tea in his hands, and still, he would feel a bone-deep chill. Daniel looked at his left hand. A pale, indented line circled his ring finger, a ghost of the wedding band he had worn for so long. The day he received the signed papers, he had thrown that ring into the reflection pool without a moment's hesitation, freeing himself from 5 years of bondage. He had fought so hard to escape the prison of that marriage. How could he ever go back? So no matter what Sarah did for him now, no matter how many times she risked her life for him, he would not go back. As he was lost in these thoughts, there was another knock on the door. Sarah. She had saved his life, after all. He couldn't bring himself to be cold to her. "Thank you for saving me." Sarah sat down on the edge of his bed, about to reply, "Of course, we're married," when she remembered. They were divorced. The words died on her lips, and she said instead, "It was nothing. It was the right thing to do." She then went on to explain that the road out of town was still blocked by the avalanche. Luckily, the cell tower had been repaired, so she had been able to call home and let everyone know they were safe. It would take at least 3 more days to clear the road, and since he was still recovering, they had decided to stay put for a while. Before she could finish, his stomach let out a loud growl. He realized he hadn't had anything to eat or drink since he'd woken up. He reached for the thermos on the nightstand, but a hand got there first. She opened it, poured some of the soup into a bowl, and then lifted a spoonful to his lips. The soup was still steaming, having just come from the thermos. The rising steam blurred the space between them. Seeing that he wasn't moving, she spoke. "You just woke up," she urged gently. "You need to eat something to get your strength back." Daniel gestured towards the steaming spoon. "It's scalding hot. How am I supposed to eat that?" Sarah finally realized and pulled the spoon back, blowing on it a few times before offering it to him again. After he had finished the bowl, a pleasant warmth spread through him, and his eyelids began to feel heavy. But the woman before him seemed not to notice his fatigue. She took his hand, her eyes full of hope. "Daniel, after what we've been through, can you please give me a chance to make it up to you? A chance to win you back?" His drowsiness vanished instantly. He looked at her, about to refuse, but then an idea came to him. A slow smile spread across his face. "We'll see. I'm tired now." Her eyes lit up, and she quickly pulled the covers up to his chin. Okay. You get some rest. I won't bother you." After she had closed the door behind her, Daniel opened his eyes. A cold, ironic smile touched his lips. That one phrase was enough to re-energize Sarah completely. She began following him around again, a constant presence at his side. Their aunt was pleased to see them seemingly getting along, but she also caught the ironic glint in Daniel's eye whenever Sarah's back was turned. She suppressed her hopeful smile. She knew immediately what Daniel was really thinking, but she decided not to say anything to her niece. As the last of the luggage was loaded into the car, the 3 of them began the journey home. Believing she was finally making progress, Sarah was in high spirits, a constant, hopeful smile on her face. Even when Daniel pulled his hand away from hers, it didn't dampen her mood. Mr. and Mrs. Miller having heard they were on their way, were waiting at the entrance to the estate to greet them. They immediately saw Sarah hovering around Daniel, her devotion obvious. Thanks to a heads-up from her sister, a flicker of pity crossed their faces, but they said nothing. To ward off any lingering bad luck from the accident, the family held a small welcome-home dinner. Seeing how exhausted the two of them were, they didn't keep them long. Soon, they were able to retire to the guest wing. Just as Sarah was about to follow him into his room, Daniel blocked her path. "What are you doing?" "Daniel, I said I'd give you a chance to win me back. I never said we'd be sharing a room. We're divorced, Sarah." With that, he closed the door in her face. She remembered the advice her mother had whispered to her earlier that day. She pursed her lips and opened a web browser on her phone. The first suggestion that popped up was to plan a birthday celebration. Sarah opened her calendar and saw that Daniel's birthday was that weekend. She remembered last year's birthday, which she had missed because she had gone to the airport to meet Ethan. A fresh wave of guilt washed over her. She immediately made a call, having her assistant book a restaurant and arrange for flowers, and also to have the sapphire necklace she'd recently won at auction delivered there. On the top floor of the city's tallest skyscraper, the private dining room was filled with flowers and decorations. Sarah gazed out the window at the sprawling city below. But her heart was heavy. The guest of honor still hadn't arrived. A clap of thunder rattled the glass as rain began to lash against the window, reflecting her solitary figure and the lonely expression on her face. She tried calling him again, but it just rang and rang, unanswered. Her chest felt tight, as if a giant hand were squeezing her heart. Her mind flashed back to his birthday last year. The housekeeper had told her about it later. How Daniel had sat just like this, alone in the corner of a restaurant. How he had watched as the kitchen staff repeatedly reheated the elaborate meal. How they had to keep replacing the melting ice cream cake. It had been raining that night, too. She dropped her phone and covered her face, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. So, this is what it felt like to be kept waiting. To wait with so much hope, even when you know they're not coming, only to have that hope crushed. Daniel hadn't meant to stand her up. But just as he was about to leave, his aunt had roped him into an all-night poker game. He had tried to send a text to explain, but his aunt had stopped him. "Why are you explaining yourself to her? Have you forgotten what she did to you on your birthday last year? Let her wait. It won't kill her." Remembering that lonely night in the restaurant, he put his phone away. She was right. Let her wait. He had waited 5 years for her, and she had never shown up. By the time Sarah returned to the guest wing, the lights in Daniel's room were already out. She said nothing, simply leaving the gift-wrapped necklace at his door. "Happy birthday, Daniel," she whispered to herself. The setback didn't deter her. In the days that followed, she continued her campaign to win him back, a constant shadow at his side. Daniel, growing increasingly annoyed, was trying to think of an excuse to get rid of her. But before he could come up with a plan, Sarah collapsed from exhaustion. She lay in bed, pale and weak, a fever raging through her. Her mother had intended to have the staff look after her, but in her feverish state, Sarah had become stubborn. She refused to be cared for by anyone but Daniel, much to her mother's fury. She gave her daughter a light smack. "He's not your husband anymore. Why should he have to take care of you? If you won't take your medicine, then you can just lie there and suffer." She slammed the bowl of soup down on the nightstand and was about to storm out when she ran into Daniel at the door. "It's all right, Mrs. Miller. I can look after her." Her mother looked at him and sighed. "Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it." The door closed, and Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. He set up the overbed table and placed the soup on it. "Daniel," she said, looking at him with pitiful, fever-bright eyes. He crossed his arms, unmoved. "You're sick, not paralyzed. You can feed yourself." With no other choice, she began to eat the soup. "Sarah," he said suddenly. She turned to look at him, and her gaze was caught by the dark depths of his eyes. "Did you know, that night you left me for Ethan? I was sick then, too, just like you are now, except I had no one to take care of me." At the time, he had just found out about the pregnancy, and for a moment, he had hesitated about leaving. But that was the same night he realized the dates didn't add up. It made him question if the child was even his. And sure enough, when she realized he knew the truth, she had the audacity to ask him to raise her and Ethan's child as his own. The humiliation was staggering. Even when she was supposedly trying to make amends, she still treated him like a doormat. She had been willing to risk the health of her unborn child to run to Ethan's side without a second thought. If she hadn't left that night, if she had just opened his door, she would have seen his ashen face as he stared at that lab report. Daniel, her face, already pale, lost another shade of color. She hadn't known. She hadn't known any of it. She had assumed he loved her so much that he would have accepted the child, even knowing it wasn't his. In her world, the possibility that he might not love her, that he might actually leave her, had never even occurred to her. So, stop being so dramatic. He had been through so much worse. What was her little illness compared to that? Perhaps his words had an effect, because after that, she began to take her medicine without complaint. Within a couple of weeks, she was back on her feet and back to following him around. But this new routine was soon interrupted by a phone call. Perhaps sensing his time was short, old Mr. Miller announced his intention to move to Florida. He had been stationed there during his time in the military and had always felt a deep connection to the place. Now, he wanted to be laid to rest there among his old army buddies. The family, of course, protested, but the old man's mind was made up, and nothing they said could change it. Left with no other choice, Mr. and Mrs. Miller decided to move with him. They left all family and company business in Sarah's hands. On the eve of their departure, Mr. Miller called each member of the family to his side for a private word. Soon, it was Daniel's turn. "Daniel, my boy." The old man sat in his favorite armchair, smiling and beckoning him closer. For some reason, Daniel felt a lump form in his throat as he remembered the first time he had met him. He had been a scared kid from a small town, standing nervously in a corner, afraid to even look at anyone. It was Mr. Miller who had first beckoned him over, taking him under his wing. After that, no one had dared to give him any trouble. Daniel sat beside the old man and took his hand. "Grandfather." The old man looked at him with affection and gave his hand a gentle pat. "You've had a hard 5 years, my boy." At those words, Daniel could no longer hold back his tears. They fell, large and silent, soaking the front of his shirt. "I know my granddaughter can be difficult. I apologize for her." Daniel just shook his head, unable to speak. The old man sighed. "And you don't have to keep up this charade just for my sake, living under the same roof after the divorce." Daniel's eyes widened in shock. "Grandfather, how did you know?" The old man snorted. "You two can't fool me with your little games. Besides, after all you've been through, how could I expect you to stay?" A flicker of hesitation crossed Daniel's mind. "But, no buts," the old man interrupted. "I know you two have been putting on a show to make an old man happy. And while I appreciate the thought, it doesn't make me happy to know that you're miserable. When you get to my age, you don't want your family to just be around you. You want them to be happy. If you're worried she'll keep bothering you, I'll take her to Florida with me." Daniel finally managed a watery smile, but said nothing more. As he stood to leave, Mr. Miller pressed a thick envelope into his hand and said the same words he had said all those years ago. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." His eyes welled up with tears again. The moment he opened the door, Sarah, who had been waiting outside, shot to her feet. Seeing the redness in his eyes, a look of concern flashed across her face. Just as she was about to speak, a stern voice called from inside the room. "Sarah, get in here." The door was pulled shut once more. "Grandfather." Sarah was about to sit beside him, but the old man's face hardened. "Don't you dare sit. Kneel." Not daring to disobey, Sarah knelt before him. He sat up straighter and looked down at her. "I know about the divorce." "Grandfather?" She looked up at him in shock. "You know, you're just like your father was when he was courting your mother. The difference was that it had been a simple misunderstanding, and her father had the good sense to talk it out and fix things. She, on the other hand, had openly tormented Daniel for 5 years. If you didn't love him, why didn't you just say so from the start? Why did you have to drive him away before you realized what you'd lost? And now you think you can just win him back? You must be dreaming." A terrible premonition seized her, and her heart began to race, as if something precious were being ripped away from her. "You failed him for 5 years. You left him alone for 5 years. You think a little scratch and a few tears are enough to win him back. A good man like Daniel doesn't deserve to be saddled with you again." "No, Grandfather, that's not it," she stammered, scrambling to explain. "I know I was wrong. I really do, and I want to make it right. I love him, I really do." "Sarah," her grandfather said, using her full name for the first time in years. "It's too late. I've already made my decision, and I've spoken with your parents. We're going to formally adopt Daniel as our son and grandson." The words struck her like a bolt of lightning, and her mind went completely blank. "So from now on, Daniel is your brother." The old man was a man of his word. Soon, news of Sarah and Daniel's divorce spread throughout the city. But just as the gossip mill was about to go into overdrive, another, even more shocking piece of news dropped. the Miller family was formally adopting Daniel Hayes. Mrs. Miller held Daniel's hands, her face full of emotion. You know, the first time I met you, I wanted to adopt you as my own. My daughter just beat me to the punch. But it's not too late. Daniel smiled back at her, and the easy affection between them was the envy of all who saw it. From a corner of the room, Sarah watched them, her face a mask of anguish and resentment. Why? Why had it come to this? She had been so close to winning him back. And now, she covered her face and began to sob. After the party, Daniel gathered the many gifts he had received and headed happily back to his room. Just as he reached for the doorknob, he was pulled into a sudden, alcohol-scented embrace. The gifts clattered to the floor. He was about to cry out, but a hand clamped over his mouth. "Daniel, it's me." With a click, the lights flicked on. Daniel looked at the person before him and sneered. "It's late. What can I do for you, little sister?" The word sister seemed to snap something in her. She shoved him against the wall, her eyes red and wild. "Please, Daniel, don't call me that. I'm your wife. You're my husband, not my brother." A sharp slap echoed in the room. "You're drunk," Daniel said, his voice cold. "You're talking nonsense. I'm your brother." He pushed her away, intending to throw her out of the room. But in the next instant, her lips were on his in a fiery, desperate kiss. Sarah, Mrs. Miller, who had come to bring her new son a glass of warm milk, opened the door to this scene and nearly fainted. She rushed forward, pulling her daughter away and landing a sharp slap across her face. "Have you lost your mind?" Daniel took the opportunity to retreat behind Mrs. Miller, wiping his mouth with a look of utter disgust. The sight of his revulsion was like a knife in her heart. "I'm not crazy. He could have been my husband again. Why did you have to make him my brother?" She was like a woman possessed, her usual composure completely gone. "We were so close. I just needed a little more time, and we could have been together again. Why? Why would you do this?" She sank to her knees, pounding the floor in a fit of rage. Her mother watched her coldly, but before she could speak, Daniel's voice cut through the air. "Sarah, from the very beginning, I never had any intention of getting back together with you." A sob escaped her lips. "But you said you'd give me a chance. I love you so much." "That chance wasn't real. Giving you hope, only to let you down, that's the only thing you ever taught me." He smiled a cold, empty smile. "I waited for you for 5 years. Every time, you promised you would be there. And every time, you left me for Ethan. I was just returning the favor. And as for you loving me, in the 5 years we were married, you never once said you loved me. It's only after we were divorced that you started saying it. Sarah, how pathetic can you be? When he offered you his heart, you threw it away. Now that he's gone, you want him back." Sarah's face went white. "You don't love me. You just love the idea of what you can't have. The classic story of wanting the one that got away." "No, Daniel, it's you I love. Truly. After you left, I did so much thinking, and I realized, but I don't love you anymore," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I will never marry you again. I will never love you again. We can only be what we are now, brother and sister. And I'm not joking. I'm not just saying this because I'm angry." Sarah stumbled back a step, the color draining from her face. "Please, don't bother me again. After all, I'm your brother, and you're my sister. That's all we'll ever be." With that, he turned and walked away. Mrs. Miller looked at her weeping daughter and sighed. "You had your chance to cherish him, and you threw it away. What good are your tears now?" When old Mr. Miller heard what Sarah had done, he was livid. He immediately changed his plans. Her parents would stay in New York, and Sarah would be going with him to Florida. Sarah tried to protest, but her father gave her a tongue-lashing so severe it felt like a physical blow. As she left to study, he had only 3 words for her: "Have some dignity." The day Mr. Miller left for Florida, the weather was beautiful. The clear, sunny sky perfectly matched Daniel's mood. At the airport, they all gathered at the gate to say their final goodbyes. Seeing Sarah standing off to the side, a faint bruise on her cheek from his slap, Daniel sighed. He walked over to her. "Sarah." Her eyes were empty, but she managed a weak smile. "Can I have a hug?" He opened his arms and held her for a moment. It was a hug 5 years in the making. She then gently pushed him away. She slipped something into his pocket, then turned and walked through the boarding gate without looking back. Daniel pulled it out. It was a small, folded note. On it were 2 words: "Goodbye," as in forever.